The reaction of these people who are told to pee in a shower is as though somebody had told them to go out and pave the sidewalk with their own coagulated blood. I mean, they are stricken with panic at the thought of having to pee in a shower. So you can imagine how uncontrollably anxious and angry they are at being told that they will need to defecate into a red biohazard bag, then tie that bag off and put it in a bin. Hello, how are you? Welcome to my channel. My name is Tia Denise. So yesterday, me and the kids go to the pool, right? It's so hot here. It was like so mild in temperature, and then suddenly it was just like Satan showed up on the scene with him and all his minions. The sun is beating down on us. It is so hot, and there's nothing to do but go swimming. Well, there is a water park that's real near us, and we get a season pass every year, and we go like every day. And there's water slides and a lazy river and a water obstacle course, and we stay busy for 3 hours every day, and then we go home. We love it, but so does everybody else. So it's always packed. And there's always a fight for the shade. Well, yesterday we arrive and we go to set up our spot in this one specific location that I really like. It's a little bit like away from all the crowds, because when I tell you this place is packed, it's packed. And when you look out over the lazy river and you see all the kids and you're like, I bet that water is 90% urine. It just makes me feel a little less hemmed in to go to this other location where there's just not as many people, because there's just not as many deck chairs and it's kind of away from everything. But last year we had 3 umbrellas over here, and now there's only 2. And so it's a real fight for the shade under those 2 big umbrellas. Well, we got there pretty early, but most of the territory had been staked out. But I did see that there was one little spot where we could probably fit 2 little deck chairs in and get a little bit of shade. So my kids come over and I'm like instructing some, you guys move those chairs over and I'm going to put sunscreen over on this kid. And so we're doing our thing. They run off. I'm going to put sunscreen on myself and then just make sure our things are arranged before I go and off with them. Make sure our chairs aren't like too close to other people's chairs and things like that. But I was not done with that, but I was going to put sunscreen on first, let it set in while I'm arranging our things. Well, I wasn't fast enough, because the owner of the chairs, who were in the row behind us, comes over, and I didn't know who she was. She comes up and she just stands and she just stares at me, and I'm, putting sunscreen on, and she stands there and stares at me and just looks at me like this. Well, I didn't know what that look was about, because I didn't realize I'd done anything offensive. I moved some chairs over to the shade where there was room for chairs in the shade. But I was not sure why she was upset about that. I mean, it's 100 degrees out. Are you going to begrudge somebody some shade? So it didn't even occur to me that she was pissed off at me and wanted me to feel her anger and indignation. So I'm like, does she know me from church? Does she know me from like a school function? Like, is she trying to place me from like a social function or something? Like, why is she standing there staring at me? Again, totally not realizing she's mad at me. She goes around behind me to get to her stuff. Her husband comes up and she says real loudly to him, "Good luck getting any of your stuff, because you're definitely not going to be able to reach it now." And then I'm like, oh, she's mad. She feels like I took up some of their space. And so I'm like, oh, well, I mean, I can fix that. I realize that they want me to know that they're mad. And so I'm like, oh, is there a problem? And she starts like, well, she just walks off in a huff. And I'm calling after her. I'm like, hey, I can rearrange. Like, if there's a problem, let's talk about it. And she's like, she just totally like she set her face against me. She doesn't even turn around. She doesn't even acknowledge me. I'm calling after her. Like, there's no way she didn't hear me. And so I'm like, I start like moving our chairs like out into the sun. So we just have like just a little bit of shade, enough for the kids to kind of maybe sit at the top of the chairs and get a little shade. But I pull the legs out. It's all in the sun. But I say to her husband, who's still there, I'm like, I am so sorry. Let me arrange our chairs. We weren't trying to infringe on your space. We just needed a little bit of the shade. He's like, it's not a big deal. I'm like, oh, so you're just married to a psycho. And it was in that moment when I realized I would not have survived on the Carnival cruise ship Triumph, because I had just watched a documentary entitled Trainwreck Poop Cruise, in which people become animals when resources are limited. Let's talk about this documentary. It is hands down the craziest thing I've ever seen. It is insane. It is insane. And I'll tell you why this is such an amazing documentary. The brilliance of this documentary is that they hand selected some of the best people to interview who are just absolute characters, but they don't know it. And that's what's so amazing about it. So we have, as far as the guests who were interviewed, we have a father-daughter duo. The father had just gone through a divorce and had wanted to give his daughter some fun times. These two love cruises. They love them and had been on a lot of them. And so he was wanting to take her for some father-daughter time so that he could kind of help her recover from what seems like it was a real negative divorce. Okay. Then we have the bachelorette party. These three women are confirmed alcoholics, whether they realize it or not. They only cared about drinking on this trip, and any time in which they were not given drink, they were angry, indignant, and looking for somebody to lash out at. The way they describe their ambitions for this trip was that they wanted to basically drink themselves blind and lose their dignity. I'm not even joking with you. One of them literally says that that was the objective. So they're fun. Then we have a guy who is on the ship, and he's under a lot of pressure because he's on vacation with his soon-to-be in-laws. He had just asked his girlfriend's father for her hand in marriage and had been granted permission. But he feels like he really needs to make sure that these people know that he's the son-in-law that they really want. So he feels an enormous amount of pressure to be on this ship for 4 days with these people. Really excited to be going on an all-expense-paid vacation, but the stakes are high for him. Then they interviewed 3 separate crew members to discuss their side of things. We have Jen, who is the voice of the ship. She was sort of like coordinator of all entertainment and guest experience. I have to say, as a side note, Carnival had better give that woman a raise. She was so capable, and even in her descriptions of the events, never seemed overwhelmed. It could be her British voice and her British mannerisms that just seem like calm and cool under crisis, but she held up well under this chaos. And even in her descriptions of it, even as she describes it, she never seems like she felt that things were out of control. They were just very unpleasant. Wow, I need a little bit more of that energy in my life. Then we have a chef, and his experience was traumatic as he tried to feed a ship of 1,000 people with no food. And then we have this other crew member who I think they just chose because she was from the former Soviet Union, and she is constantly comparing her experience in Russia with her experience on the cruise ship, and that's kind of hilarious. She also seems to be a sex addict, so that was also an interesting feature from all of her interviews. Then we have 2 outside characters who are interviewed in this documentary. One is a lawyer who is sitting there drinking whiskey and smoking a cigar, a total caricature of this ambulance chaser. He is watching the news, and he's super excited about suing the cruise line. He's real excited about getting a class action lawsuit going. By the end of it, he will have failed, but he is feasting on the windfall he believes is coming his way. You've never seen someone so gleeful over somebody else's misfortune. And then you have a CNN anchor, I think a former CNN anchor, who talks about what it was to be on the news side of this story and how she didn't take it seriously at first, and then it became this all-consuming thing. And it's all they would talk about was the poop cruise. Okay. So how in the world did this vacation that was supposed to be so great go so badly? And the psychology of people's behavior when things and resources are scarce is insane. That lady who freaked out because I took a little bit of her shade would not have made it on the poop cruise, okay? It all started out fine. It was supposed to be a 4-day trip. They were supposed to take 2 days out at sea. They were going to stop at Cozumel and in Mexico, and they were going to get off the ship, party, have a good time, get back on the ship, and then back to Galveston, Texas. Okay, 4 days total. But 2.5 days in, things went to hell in a handbasket. So they go to Cozumel, they party and party. The bachelorette party says, in their words, "We left our dignity in Mexico." And one girl says she didn't even know how she got back up on the ship. She has zero recollection of it. I guess for whatever reason, they thought that it would be compelling for them to share photos with Netflix that they had taken of each other passed out on the floor in the hallway of the ship once they had gotten back on. I feel like they should have guarded those pictures a little bit more carefully. But anyway, they stumble to their rooms and they pass out. In the middle of the night, they hear this alarm going off over the loudspeaker, and it's this just very jarring sound. It would be jarring if you were stone cold sober, but if you were laying in the bed in a puddle of your own filth because you had passed out and blacked out drunk, and then you wake up to this alarm and they're saying alpha team, alpha team, alpha team. I was like, I was disturbed, but I was like, can I fast forward this? Like, it was just very annoying. So I can only imagine waking up half drunk to that. Their room is pitch black. They don't know what's going on. And there's people running up and down the halls, banging on doors and telling everyone to get to their muster stations. They had neglected to go to their safety meeting because it just didn't seem that important to them. Like, there's nothing we're going to learn there. So they didn't know where their muster station was. In the course of events, they find it. So they stagger up on deck and they see that the ship is just burst into flames. That red tail that's on the top was just burning real good. Black smoke spilling out, flames are billowing out, and everyone's in a panic. But then they are given the message that, oh, well, this kind of happens sometimes. We've got 6 engines. One of them's out, but we still have 5. So we're good. Go back to your scheduled activities. It's 5 o'clock in the morning when the fire starts. And then they get the news about 6-ish that they can go about their day. So go get yourself a cup of coffee, grab some breakfast, go about your day. We're good. Sorry, guys. No need to panic. Okay, no need to panic. So everyone goes to get some breakfast. Everyone goes and gets a cup of coffee. And in that moment, the lights go down. They can hear the air conditioning shut down. Everything is dead, including the propulsion system on the ship, including the ship's ability to keep itself right. And so it's constantly listing from side to side now. What? I mean, they have high hopes that they're going to be able to get this power up. Unfortunately, their hopes are dead in the water because nothing from this point on is ever going to be right. The crew realizes that without electricity, they now no longer have any ability to flush the toilets. The plumbing system also seems to have been tied to the electricity on this ship. Everything is horrific. The main thing is that there's nowhere to go to the bathroom. But the secondary concern is that there's no way to refrigerate all that food. So apparently, as I've heard, when you go on a cruise, it's just food, food, food. Every person I've ever known who went on a cruise is like, well, don't go on a cruise if you want to lose weight because I came back 10 pounds fatter. It's food, food, food. As far as the eye can see, the buffets, the food, it's never ending. And people have been living the high life for 2.5 days. But with no electricity, you got to throw out all of the perishables. Well, the perishables are the good food, so what are you going to eat now? Well, there's nothing to eat. But we'll get to that in a minute. Let's talk about the toilet situation. All right, so without toilets that can flush and with plumbing that's not working, although they don't quite realize that yet, they decide that people are going to have to do something in order to relieve themselves. Well, Jen says, you could pee over the side of the ship if you were a guy, but that's not real convenient for the women because if they try to prop themselves up on that railing, they might fall down. Also, with the way the decks are, some fool might accidentally be peeing down onto somebody on another deck, so we can't just have people whipping it out, peeing all over the side of the ship. They came up with a plan for if you had to urinate, you needed to go into one of the showers, one of the stand-up showers, and then you need to just pee in the stand-up shower. Okay. That to me doesn't really feel like it's the end of the world to be told to pee in a shower. I mean, is it ideal? No. But I feel like that is a solution I could live with. The reaction of these people who are told to pee in a shower is as though somebody had told them to go out and pave the sidewalk with their own coagulated blood. I mean, they are stricken with panic at the thought of having to pee in a shower. So you can imagine how uncontrollably anxious and angry they are at being told that they will need to defecate into a red biohazard bag, then tie that bag off and put it in a bin. People are losing their minds over the red biohazard bag. Okay. It's not ideal, But I also feel like, how hard could this be? Couldn't you just put the bag into the toilet, do your business, and tie it off? Like, it's not, okay, in my greatest nightmare, I would be pooping in a bag, but also I can poop in a bag. Like, if that is my only option for survival at this point, that's what I'm going to choose. And it's just not, just can't even imagine. Like, there are people who are like, I just stopped eating. I stopped eating. The bachelorette party said they started taking medication so that they would not use the restroom. I don't ever want to poop in a bag, but if that was the option that was presented to me, that versus everyone just continues to defecate in the same toilet over and over and over and over again, I think I'm choosing the bag I can tie off and put into another location far from me. Although the location of all these poop bags was going to be below deck, way below deck. Can you imagine the stench of that room? If only people had followed directions. Because here's the thing, everyone was peeing in the showers, but even that turned out to not really work because the plumbing seemed to be tied to the electrical, so nothing was draining. So you get these shallow showers full of urine. Ugh. At that point, I can begin understanding why people are like, I don't want to pee in the shower. If the shower drain was draining, okay, let's just pee in the shower and not, let's just not talk about it. Let's just go do it and like move on. Doesn't need to be like a big dramatic thing. Just stand over the hole and go. I think we can manage it. But people were so opposed to using the red bag that they just began using the toilets, and then they would put toilet paper over that, and they would use the toilet again and put toilet paper over that. So you get these toilets that are just heaping full of feces. All right, well, that is not ideal because when the ship begins to list from side to side, what is sloshing out of these toilets? Urine and feces. So there's a situation of all of this disgusting waste seeping out of the bathrooms, bit by bit by bit. Okay, put a pin in that story. We need to talk about the food situation, okay? As I stated, all the perishables had to be thrown out. So the chef says that he realized things were going to go badly very quickly when he had a ship of thousands of people and all he had was bread, onions, and tomatoes to feed them with. What? The panic that would be in my heart. And these are people who are used to feasting high off the hog. I mean, that's part of the cruise experience is the endless amounts of food. So people were having to like get in line, and they were standing in line for 2 hours, and they didn't know what they were standing in line for. They just knew there was food at this place. So they would go stand in line, and then you would get to the buffet counter, and there was a soggy tomato and onion sandwich awaiting you, and a fistful of ladyfinger cookies if you cared to have those for your dessert. Immediately, people were angry about the option, but then angry that they couldn't get as much of it as they wanted. And people began hoarding food and, grabbing as much as they could and then running off to their little tent cities that they had created. Because on deck of these ships were all of these little encampments. People had dragged their mattresses from their rooms out onto the deck because there was no air conditioning. And the inside of the ship stank. And you've got these urine and feces lined hallways because of the exploding toilets. And then you have dank, hot, stuffy air because there's no air conditioning. There's nothing moving the air in and out of these places. It was untenable. So people have grabbed their mattresses, brought them up on deck. They've created tent cities where they've taken the sheets and tied them onto railings. And then you have all these people scrounging and scurrying around looking for food, waiting in line for 2 hours and not wanting their whole party to wait. So they're trying to get enough food for everyone in their group. And then you've got, fights breaking out. How dare you? That's too much. And what about us? We waited and waited and you're going to take up all the food. So fights are breaking out and it is just a fiasco. Meanwhile, the bridal party is outraged because why is the bar closed? We came to have a good time. And you can't give us something to drink? They were super angry that there was no alcohol at this point of the journey. Well, they couldn't have been the only ones because the crew was trying to figure out, okay, how do we keep everybody happy? Everyone's angry. What do we do to make sure that this doesn't become mutiny on the bounty. So they come up with a plan that they'll open the bar. They'll open the bar from noon of that day to midnight. And they're going to have an open bar, free drinks. Everyone happy with that? Now, Jen, the voice of reason on this ship, was like, this is a terrible plan. We need to not do this. This is only going to create chaos. There's already chaos and these people are sober. We add alcohol to that mix, it's going to get crazy. It did. It did. So they start passing out drinks. They're serving beer and wine. And you can have as much as you want. So people are just double fisting drinks. Things are getting chaotic. Fights are breaking out. People are just stripping down and just having sex right there on the deck. Right there in front of like other families. Just going at it like animals. Then people, I guess just in a riotous mood, start taking the bag full of feces and throwing the red bags of feces over the side of the ship, except the wind keeps blowing the feces back onto the people on the lower decks. Folks are urinating off of the side. People are crying. They're getting upset. Emotions are running high. And finally, they decide they got to shut the bar down. If this is too much, the people can't handle it. So they shut the bar down and then everyone's mad. And the girls are like, it was so hard because like for like a tiny little bit, we were like given a respite. We could like just drink and have a good time and not have to think about what we were having to live through. It was just nice to forget. I was like, okay. Part of the problem is that, of course, there's no propulsion system on the ship. So they can't go where they need to go, and they're just sort of at the mercy of the ocean and the winds. And they were supposed to go all the way up to Galveston originally, but that was no longer going to be possible because they couldn't steer that way. So then they were told that they were going to have to dock at a place in Mexico and that they would then have to get flights home from this other port in Mexico. That was the closest one. But because the wind had been pushing them north, that was no longer going to be feasible to get a tugboat to pull them back there. So now they were going to have to wait for tugboats to take them, and they were going to have to go back to Mobile, Alabama. So everyone was expecting that they were going to be rescued that first day. No, sister, that's going to be 4 more days. You know, things are beyond terrible. Obviously, the living conditions are terrible. The bathroom situation's bad. There's no food, but also they're cut off from the rest of the world. When the power system went down, so did the cell reception. So no one can call their families. No one can let anybody know what's happening. And it kind of feels like Carnival Cruise isn't working real hard to solve the problem quickly. And I shouldn't say that because the documentary didn't go into a whole lot into what the Carnival Cruise was doing. But when they had reception to the mainland, their first objective was to get a press release out about the fact that there was power out, but they had it under control. Nothing in that press release was talking about the fact that there was no food, it was untenable conditions with no air conditioning, and hallways full of urine and feces. So obviously, they knew that if the story got out, it would be ugly. And it was to their benefit to keep people from being able to communicate with the mainland. Well, in the course of them drifting through the ocean, they pass another Carnival cruise ship, which had altered course in order to meet them and give them some food supplies. When that ship came close enough, they have all the guests on that other ship taking pictures of them, and obviously, those on the broken cruise ship were deeply offended. It's like, we're not a circus show here. We're not a zoo. Quit taking our pictures. We need help. But they realize, as I see everybody with their phones over there, that, oh, they have Wi-Fi. They have a signal. And so everyone starts grabbing their phone and holding their phones up, trying to get a signal so that they can tell their families back home what's happening. And also tell the news what's happening. Get help for us. So people start being able to contact their families briefly while that other Carnival ship is pulled alongside, bringing supplies over. And the news starts leaking out that this is not just a Carnival ship who happens to have the power out for like a little bit. This is a traveling, disease-ridden fiasco, and that people are in desperate need of assistance. They need help. They need to get off of this ship. And so the news starts picking up this story. Initially, they hadn't really thought the story was worthy of discussing. And as when you think that the ship is just a ship out there and that like the power went off, it's like, okay, y'all will survive. But when you hear that it's a ship that's rolling through the ocean, and everyone's literally squashing through the carpets in the hallways on urine and feces, and there's no food, and people are, living out in conditions out on top deck because there's no way you can go into that nasty hold, you start realizing this might actually be a pretty interesting story. So CNN took this on as their little baby, and they talked about this story morning, noon, and night. Well, finally, help arrives. Okay, so they had been waiting and waiting and waiting for the tugboats to come. And the ship, as I said, had been listing from side to side. But when they attached themselves to this tugboat, which was really not powerful enough to pull them as far as it needed to go, it pulled the ship so that it tilted way over, and everything that had just been sort of like lapping over the edge of these full shallow showers was pouring over. The walls were dripping in raw sewage. The bags of disgusting fecal matter were floating down the hallways on streams of urine. And everybody still had all their stuff in their rooms. So they're going like backwards and forwards to upper deck to down below to get their stuff, waiting in squishy, stinking carpet, knowing full well what they're walking on, but they got to get to their stuff. And I am telling you this much right now. I would have thrown myself overboard before walking around in these people's nasty sewage. I feel like I would rather have swum to shore. Obviously, that's not possible. But I cannot even imagine the degradation of this. The poor dad who had been trying to bring his daughter on a trip so he could bond with her is beside himself to this day that it happened like this. Like, he was near tears multiple times because he said he felt like he couldn't protect his daughter, that the conditions were so bad. They didn't even know what time it was, what day it was. It was just going on and on and on. He just woke up to go back to sleep to try to get through another day. And the poor guy who was there trying to impress his in-laws, walked that ship, went every single place because he had heard a rumor that there was a public toilet available that still functioned. That poor guy walked from stern to bow looking everywhere for a place where he could direct his in-laws to use a toilet. He found it, so he prevailed. And, you do feel a small victory for him in that. I don't know how he found a toilet that was working because nobody else seemed to manage it, but he found a toilet and saved his in-laws from having to poop in the red bags. And I feel like that's why they will love him to this very day. Now, as the ship is listing to one side as the tugboats are trying to pull them, everything is awash with, as I said, raw sewage. But that tugboat continues to become detached from the ship because the tug lines keep snapping. So we're having all of this frustration because not only is the tugboat only able to pull the ship 5 miles an hour, it keeps becoming detached from the ship. Finally, 8 days into this journey, they finally pull into port in Mobile. And everybody is thrilled to get off. And astoundingly, people, although their experience was really terrible, so terrible that at one point a revival began to break out and they're having like tent meeting, preaching and singing because people are like, I need to get close to God. It was so terrible that people are like, where's Jesus? They finally get into Mobile and everybody is so happy to be on land. This was the most traumatic thing they'd ever lived through. People are like, I'm going to need psychological help. I am damaged psychologically from this experience. This was horrific. I never knew that humans could treat humans like this. This was so awful. But they were so complimentary about the Carnival's staff that they had banners over the side of the ship being like, Triumph crew, the best ever, And so it's like, what a compliment to Carnival Cruise. They would have a ship drenched in raw sewage and people still get off and like, but the crew was awesome. That's pretty incredible. Anyway, everyone goes about their daily lives. The spider of a lawyer in the background who's just been sitting on his web looking for a moment to pounce can't wait to sue Carnival and create some kind of class action lawsuit for all these people who he knows are going to be very angry. And within hours of getting on land, there were people trying to sue Carnival. But They could not. Because in the small print, when you purchase a ticket for Carnival Cruise Line, it says that they are not responsible for your trip. They're not responsible for having a sea-worthy vessel. They're not responsible for if you get hurt. They're not responsible for anything that happens on the ship, including the consumption of good food. They are not responsible for feeding you anything that is edible. Basically, you're getting on this ship, and if you die, you die. Not their problem. So the fact that they got you from point A to point B in any manner, that's about all you can expect. And not even that, honestly, because they're not really concerned if the vessel is seaworthy. See, part of the problem was that this particular ship had 9 separate incidents where it had been reported that a fire was going to destroy all the power lines if they didn't get things sorted, and they didn't take it seriously. And that's why this lawyer thought that he would be able to have a case against Carnival, because they had been told, you guys need to shore up this electrical room because it's a nightmare in here. Some of these cables need to be sheathed, and they just didn't do it. Well, since they didn't do it, the ship goes up in flames and then burns up all the electrical cords, and the ship's out of power, and the toilets aren't working, and everything goes to hell in a handbasket, as I said. But since they had never promised you a seaworthy vessel, good food to eat, or pleasant experience while you were there, they were not at fault for the fact that they hadn't bothered to fix the electrical, even though they had known about it 9 separate times. Carnival Cruise Lines spent $115 million restoring this ship. $115 million. Wouldn't it have been just as cheap to buy a new one? Anyway, they restored it, and they renamed it Carnival Sunrise. So if you decide to go on a Carnival cruise, I would suggest that you don't go on that particular ship. I don't care if they restored it. That place is going to reek. I mean, how in the world are the walls drenched in urine and feces, and you think that you can just kind of like paint over that mess? Ain't no amount of money going to fix that mess. But, you know, it's been restored, and it's going on through its journeys. Remarkably, the father-daughter duo still going on cruises all a day. At the end of the documentary, they said that those two still love a good cruise, just not with Carnival. The bachelorette woman, she's still alive and kicking. She got married, and she gave all of her bridal gifts in red biohazard bags, which I thought was kind of funny. And the guy who saved the day and found a working, functioning toilet for his in-laws goes on vacation with his in-laws every year. Although, as the documentary stated, they like to stay on land. I thought it was hilarious. It was a very humorous documentary. It's only like an hour long, so it's not like you're really having to commit a lot of time. But I cannot believe that this happened to anybody. I mean, it goes from bad to worse in an instant. You cannot even believe how much sewage is on this ship. And I guess it should have dawned on me, if every single person is using the restroom multiple times a day, you know, both urinating and defecating, and that's thousands and thousands of people. Where else was this supposed to go but on the floor, I guess? Can you imagine anything worse? Like, I feel like if I was going to like write down like what could be the worst thing that could ever happen to me, it would be to have this happen on a cruise. Because I have to say, I'm not necessarily inclined to the cruise experience anyway. It seems like a lot of confined situation with all of the same people who might annoy me. I can't get away from these people. I am on a traveling ship with some obnoxious individuals, and I can't get away. And everything always looks crowded. Like even in the shots before where it's like, look at them all having a good time. I'm like, there's too much going on. I can't. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a real negative Nancy. That's always a possibility. But just the cruise experience always seemed negative to me, even in the best lights. So to be on ship with all of these hot, sweaty, drunk strangers, and then everything goes to shit, literally, I can't. And I won't, because none of these people got on this ship expecting it to be the poop cruise. How can I know I won't be on the second poop cruise if I ever say yes to a cruise? Never. Never will I ever. And since I can't seem to manage to get along with strangers at a water park, what hope do I have? Now, if you get a chance, watch it, and then let's talk about it in the comments, because that documentary was wild. I just cannot even believe anybody had to experience that. All right, thanks so much for hanging out with me. I loved it. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.